Billionaire husband betrayed wife, left her broken pregnant. 23 years later, her daughter owned his company. Hi, my beautiful family. Before we begin, welcome back to our community. May the Almighty God wrap you in peace, cover you with favor, and surround you with people who honor your worth. May every door that should open for you swing wide, and every door that would harm you remain forever closed. Amen. The first time Brandon Walter saw Teresa across the charity gala ballroom, the world tilted on its axis and his carefully controlled life cracked open. She stood at the presentation podium, defending her sustainable housing design against a panel of condescending investors who clearly saw her as entertainment, not competition. Her voice was steady, her conviction unshakable as she spoke about building homes that made families feel safe, not just profitable. While they threw financial jargon like weapons, she spoke from the soul about human dignity. Brandon stood frozen at the champagne bar, his pulse hammering against his throat like it was trying to escape his chest and run to her. "You're staring," his assistant Marcus muttered beside him. "That's Teresa, the architect everyone's talking about. Brilliant, passionate, completely out of your league morally speaking. Your board would eat her alive." Brandon barely registered the warning. When Teresa smiled at something, cutting down an investor's lazy argument with grace and data, the sound of the room's approving murmur struck him like lightning. He'd dated a dozen women from his social circle, polished, predictable, forgettable. But this woman radiated purpose, a fire that called to something he'd buried beneath quarterly earnings and hostile takeovers. For 2 weeks, he found excuses to appear wherever she worked. Teresa was everything he didn't know he'd been searching for. She dominated community planning meetings, worked late into the night perfecting renderings by hand, and carried herself with a dignity that made his billionaire peers look like children playing Monopoly. She spoke about architecture like it was a form of love, building spaces where people could heal, dream, and belong. That evening, as the gala wound down, Brandon found his opportunity. Teresa stepped onto the building's rooftop terrace for air, away from the crowded ballroom. He followed. "The view from up here is better than anything inside," he said, approaching carefully. She turned, recognized him immediately, and her expression shifted, cautious but curious. "You're Brandon Walter. Your family owns half the skyline I'm trying to redesign for actual human beings." "Guilty." He stopped a respectful distance away. "And you're Teresa, the architect who's going to prove that profit and compassion aren't enemies." A small smile tugged at her lips. "That's ambitious coming from someone who's never spoken to me. I've been listening to you down there. Your housing concepts aren't just beautiful, they're revolutionary. You design like you're building sanctuaries, not assets." For the next 3 hours, they talked about everything and nothing. Brandon found himself confessing dreams he'd never said aloud, about legacy beyond wealth, about building something that mattered, while Teresa revealed vulnerabilities hidden beneath her fierce professional armor. When the gala finally ended and staff began clearing the terrace, they walked through the city under the glow of streetlights, their conversation flowing like they'd known each other across lifetimes. "My board isn't going to like this," Brandon said as they reached her studio entrance, his hand brushing hers. Teresa's expression shifted, a shadow of caution crossing her face. "Because I'm not from your world. Because you're real," Brandon said softly, "and they hate anything that threatens their perfectly controlled narrative." Teresa studied him for a long moment, then smiled, a smile that held both hope and warning. "Then I guess we'll see if you're as brave as you think you are." That conversation became the first of many. Brandon showed up at Teresa's cramped studio the next morning with coffee and croissants, asking to see her latest designs. Then he came back the next day, and the next. Within a month, he'd quietly transferred seed funding into her firm's account, enough to hire 2 junior architects and move into a real office space. "You don't have to do this," Teresa said, overwhelmed by the check amount. "I'm not doing it for charity," Brandon replied, his hand covering hers across the drafting table. "I'm investing in the future. Your vision is going to change this city, Teresa. I just want to be part of it." The romance unfolded like something from a fairy tale. Brandon took her on helicopter tours to survey potential development sites, where she'd sketch furiously in a notebook while he pointed out parcels of land he could acquire. The media caught wind of their relationship and ran with it. The empire builder and the dream architect. One magazine headline declared, featuring them standing together on a construction site, Teresa in a hard hat, Brandon's arm protectively around her shoulders. He proposed 6 months later at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for her first major project, a community housing complex she'd designed for working families. In front of cameras, city officials, and 200 residents, Brandon got down on one knee and produced a ring that caught the sunlight like a promise. Teresa said yes through tears while the crowd erupted in applause. The wedding was held in the penthouse ballroom of Walter Tower, Brandon's crown jewel property. Magazine photographers captured every moment. Teresa in an elegant gown, Brandon looking at her like she'd hung the stars themselves. Their vows spoke of partnership, of building empires and dreams together, of never forgetting where they came from. During the reception, Brandon surprised her with an announcement that made headlines. He was launching a new company division named Twilight Developments, after her habit of sketching at dusk when the light turned golden. "Your designs, my capital, our legacy," he declared to thunderous applause, Teresa's eyes bright with tears of joy. The press called it the most romantic business merger in history. What they didn't know was that every document had already been drafted, every trademark filed, every ownership structure designed to ensure Brandon controlled it all. But beneath the perfect surface, small cracks appeared, barely noticeable at first. "You're too trusting, you know that?" Brandon would say with a laugh when Teresa took clients at their word or didn't scrutinize contract terms closely. "In this world, people will smile while they rob you blind." His sister Veronica was less subtle. At a family dinner 3 weeks before the wedding, she cornered Teresa in the powder room. "Love is wonderful, dear, but in our world, love isn't enough. Paperwork is everything. I hope you understand that." Teresa had smiled politely, uncomfortable but unwilling to start family drama. The prenup appeared 2 weeks before the wedding, delivered by Brandon's legal team during what was supposed to be a cake tasting. 3 lawyers in expensive suits laid out a thick document while Brandon squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It's completely standard," he explained, his voice warm and apologetic. "The board requires it for any executive marriage. Protection from frivolous lawsuits, gold diggers, that sort of thing. You know how paranoid corporate attorneys are." Teresa flipped through pages of dense legal language, her head already spinning from seating charts and flower arrangements and 1,000 other wedding details. "This seems extensive." "It looks worse than it is," Brandon assured her, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "The truth is, everything I have is ours, Teresa. This is just a formality to keep the lawyers happy and protect us both from outside interference. Sign it as a gesture of trust, trust that we're in this together, that no piece of paper defines what we mean to each other." His lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Hutchinson, nodded smoothly. "Mrs. Walter-to-be, this is identical to documents signed by executives' spouses across the industry. Standard asset protection protocol. Nothing more." "Should I have my own lawyer review it?" Teresa asked hesitantly. Brandon's expression flickered, just for a second, before his smile returned. "Of course you can, if that would make you feel better. Though we'd need to push the wedding back a few weeks for the review process, and the venue's booked solid after our date. But absolutely, if you need that reassurance." Teresa looked at his earnest face, thought about the hundreds of guests already confirmed, the deposits placed, her mother flying in from across the country. She thought about the past year, his unwavering support, the funding that saved her practice, the way he championed her work to everyone who mattered. "No," she said finally, reaching for the pen. "You're right. We're partners. I trust you." Brandon's smile widened as she signed each page, his hand steady on her shoulder. Later that night, after Teresa had gone home to finish wedding preparations, Brandon's sister Veronica met with attorney Hutchinson in Brandon's office. She held a copy of the signed prenup, her manicured finger tracing certain clauses. "Section 12, subsection 4, Hutchinson confirmed quietly. "All equity in Teresa Walters' architecture firm, along with any intellectual property developed during the marriage, defaults to Walter Holdings upon any dissolution of marriage or at the company's discretion." "And she has no claim to his assets?" "Correct. The settlement cap is $250,000 regardless of marriage duration or circumstances. Veronica's smile was cold and satisfied. My brother always did know how to close a deal. She just signed away everything she'll ever build, and she thinks it's a love story. Hutchinson snapped his briefcase shut. In our world, Miss Walter, it's always business, even when it looks like romance. 2 years into their marriage, Teresa had become exactly what Brandon promised she would be, a rising star. Her division, Twilight Developments, was featured in architectural journals and urban planning conferences. She designed tech-integrated affordable housing that won awards while generating steady profits. The media loved them, the visionary billionaire and his architect wife, proving that purpose and profit could coexist. Teresa discovered she was pregnant on a Tuesday morning. She'd suspected for weeks but waited to confirm before telling Brandon. That evening, she found him in their penthouse study, reviewing acquisition documents. "Brandon," she said softly, her hands trembling slightly, "I have news." He looked up, distracted. "Can it wait? The Singapore deal is—" "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air. Brandon's expression shifted. First shock, then something that looked like genuine joy. He stood, crossed to her, pulled her into an embrace. "Teresa, that's incredible." She felt tears prick her eyes, relief flooding through her. "You're happy?" "Of course I'm happy." He held her face gently. "We're going to be parents." But the warmth lasted only moments before his phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at the screen. A message from Veronica marked urgent. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I have to take this," he said, stepping away. "Board emergency. We'll celebrate properly tonight, I promise." Teresa watched him disappear into his office, the door clicking shut behind him. She touched her stomach, trying to hold on to the joy, but something cold had already crept into the room. In Brandon's private office, Veronica's voice came through the speaker, sharp as broken glass. "Tell me she's not actually pregnant." "She just told me." "Perfect timing," Veronica said acidly. 3 months before the Meridian merger, the deal that puts us in the global top 10. "Brandon, do you understand what the optics are?" A second voice joined the call, smooth, feminine, calculated. Diane Castellanos, the venture capitalist whose firm controlled access to the Meridian investment network. "Brandon, darling, let me be direct," Diane purred. "Our investors bought into the image, the relentless visionary who lives for innovation, unencumbered by domestic distractions. A pregnant wife shifts priorities. It makes you look like a man building nurseries instead of empires. It undermines the brand we've spent 2 years building." "She's my wife," Brandon said, but his voice lacked conviction. "And she's a liability," Veronica cut in. "The board is already nervous about her division's expenses. If you go into merger negotiations looking like a family man instead of a shark, Meridian walks. $20 billion walks away because you couldn't keep your personal life separate from business." Brandon pinched the bridge of his nose. "What are you suggesting?" "We're not suggesting anything," Diane said carefully. "We're simply observing that a routine financial audit of Twilight Developments might reveal inefficiencies, misallocated resources, the kind of creative accounting that happens when passion projects aren't properly supervised. Teresa runs that division by the book." "Does she?" Veronica's tone hardened. "Because Hutchinson's team has been reviewing her department's expenditures. Luxury site visits charged as research, premium materials billed as standard, conference trips that look suspiciously like vacations, all technically legal, but easily reframed as fraud with the right presentation." Brandon's blood ran cold. "You fabricated an audit." "We protected your interests," Veronica corrected. "The question is, do you want to be a billionaire who conquered global markets? Or a husband who lost everything defending a wife who may have betrayed your trust?" The call ended. Brandon sat in the darkness, 2 documents on his desk illuminated by lamplight. On the left, the falsified audit report with Teresa's name highlighted in damning yellow. On the right, the Meridian merger term sheet, $20 billion, access to infinite capital, his name carved into history. Through the study's glass wall, he could see Teresa in the living room. She was hanging something on the wall, small sketches of nursery designs, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, her face glowing with hope. Brandon looked back at the documents, the audit, the merger, the wife, the fortune. He reached for his phone and dialed Hutchinson. "Draft the separation papers," he said quietly. "Make it clean, make it legal, and make sure she can't fight back." 3 months passed. Teresa's pregnancy progressed. Morning sickness gave way to visible changes. Excitement mixed with Brandon's increasingly distant behavior. He cited merger stress, board pressures, endless travel. She told herself it was temporary, that once the deal closed, they'd focus on preparing for their baby together. She was wrong. Teresa heard the footsteps before she saw them. Multiple sets, hard-soled and purposeful, against the marble foyer. She looked up from the nursery color samples spread across the dining table, expecting Brandon home early with good news about the merger. Instead, he entered with 4 people: Attorney Hutchinson, 2 security personnel, and a woman she didn't recognize holding a leather portfolio. "Brandon?" Teresa stood slowly, her hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly. "What's going on?" His expression was cold, detached, the face he wore in hostile boardroom negotiations, not the one he showed his wife. "Teresa, sit down," he said. Not a request, a command. "I don't understand. An audit of Twilight Developments has uncovered serious financial irregularities." Hutchinson stepped forward, placing a bound report on the table. "Misappropriation of company funds, unauthorized expenses, what amounts to embezzlement of nearly $2 million over 18 months? The room tilted. "That's insane. I haven't done anything." "The evidence is documented," Brandon interrupted, his voice flat. "Premium materials billed as standard. Personal trips disguised as business expenses. You put the entire company at risk, Teresa. Thousands of jobs, my reputation, everything I built." She noticed his language. I, not we. Her company had become his company. Her designs, his property. "Brandon, this is a mistake. Let me see the audit. I can explain." "There's nothing to explain." He nodded to the security team. "We need to secure company property, immediately." They moved with military efficiency. One guard collected her laptop from the study. Another requested her access cards, her company phone, the car keys to the vehicle registered under Walter Holdings. The woman with the portfolio began photographing the nursery sketches on the wall. "Intellectual property created on company time," she explained clinically. "You're taking everything," Teresa whispered, disbelief turning to horror. "Brandon, please." "It's all outlined in the prenup you signed," Hutchinson said, not unkindly but without sympathy. "All assets, intellectual property, and access rights revert to Walter Holdings upon termination of your employment or dissolution of marriage. Section 12, subsection 4. The prenup, the document she'd signed in trust, believing they were partners. Brandon placed 2 items on the table, a check and a thick legal document. "This is your severance, $250,000, and a non-disclosure agreement stipulating you will not discuss the audit, the prenup, or any details of Meridian merger negotiations with media, former colleagues, or legal counsel." Teresa stared at the check. It wouldn't cover 6 months of rent in this city. She'd helped build a billion-dollar enterprise, and he was offering her poverty wrapped in a legal gag order. "Brandon," her voice cracked, "I'm pregnant with your child. Our child. How can you do this?" Something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or the ghost of the man she'd married. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "The company comes first," he said quietly. "It always has. And frankly, Teresa, the timing of this pregnancy is suspiciously convenient. Right before the biggest merger of my career, it looks like you were trying to trap me. Secure your position through obligation rather than merit." The words landed like physical blows. "Trap you? I loved you." "Sign the NDA," he said, turning away. "Security will escort you out. You have 1 hour to collect personal items. Nothing related to work, nothing that belongs to the company. Where am I supposed to go? That's no longer my concern." 40 minutes later, Teresa stood in the Walter Tower lobby with a single suitcase and a banker's box of personal photographs. Her maternity blouse hung loose, her face pale with shock. Outside, camera flashes exploded like artillery fire. Someone had tipped off the press. "Mrs. Walter, did you really steal $2 million? Is it true you're being investigated for fraud? Does your husband plan to press charges? Teresa shielded her face, trying to push through the crowd, but the questions kept coming, each one another nail in the coffin of her reputation. By morning, the headlines had already rewritten her story. Billionaire's wife faces fraud claims. Architect accused of embezzling millions. Golden couple's marriage crumbles amid financial scandal. Not one mentioned that she was 4 months pregnant. Not one asked why a loving husband would do this to the mother of his child. The pain started at 2 a.m. in the tiny rented room Teresa could barely afford, a studio apartment in a neighborhood she once would have designed affordable housing for, never imagining she'd live there herself. At first, she thought they were false contractions. She was only 36 weeks. Too early. But when the second wave hit, sharp and unmistakable, she knew. Her hands shook as she dialed Brandon's number. It rang, and went to voicemail. She tried again, then again, each contraction growing stronger, closer together, stealing her breath. 2,000 miles away, Brandon stood on a private island terrace, champagne glass raised toward the sunset. The Meridian merger had closed that afternoon. $20 billion, global expansion, his name cemented among the titans of industry. Diane Castellanos stood beside him, champagne flute raised in triumph. "You did what had to be done," she murmured. "Tough decisions separate legends from ordinary men." His phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. He pulled it out, saw Teresa's name flashing across the screen for the 8th time, and silenced it without looking. "Still can't let go?" Diane asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. "She'll move on eventually." Brandon pocketed the phone and drained his champagne. "They always do." Teresa's phone slipped from her trembling fingers as another contraction seized her. She needed help. She needed the hospital. But she couldn't afford an ambulance, and she couldn't drive herself. She called Brandon one more time. This time he answered. His voice was cold, distant, annoyed. "What, Teresa?" "Brandon, please." She could barely speak through the pain. "The baby's coming. I'm alone. I need—" "Call emergency services. That's what hospitals are for." "Brandon, this is your child. Stop being dramatic." His words were clipped, final. "The hospital will do its job. You made your choices. I made mine. Don't ever contact me again." The line went dead. Teresa stared at her phone, tears streaming down her face, and realized her number was blocked. She made it to the county hospital in a rideshare, the driver visibly uncomfortable as she breathed through contractions in his back seat. The emergency room admitted her with minimal paperwork, no insurance, no family contact, no one to call. 8 hours later, surrounded by nurses whose names she'd never remember and a doctor she'd never see again, Teresa gave birth to a daughter. The baby was small but healthy, with Brandon's dark eyes and Teresa's determined chin. A nurse placed her on Teresa's chest and the world narrowed to this single, perfect moment. "Madison," Teresa whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. "Madison Walter." She repeated the name like a prayer, like a promise, like a vow that someday this surname would mean something different. Not his empire, not his betrayal. Their own legacy, earned and unbreakable. The hospital bill arrived 3 days later, $47,000 for an uninsured birth. Teresa stared at the number until it blurred. She tried calling former colleagues, professional contacts, anyone who might offer work. The responses were identical. "We'd love to help, but given the circumstances." The fraud allegations make it difficult. Perhaps once things settle down, the doors that had opened so easily when she wore Brandon's name now slammed shut twice as hard. She moved into a cramped sublet. One room, a kitchenette, a bathroom where the sink leaked constantly. The walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing, sirens wailing past at all hours. On their first night there, Teresa sat on the worn mattress with Madison asleep in her arms. The baby was wrapped in a donated blanket, too small for the world she'd been born into. "They think we're finished," Teresa whispered, her lips against Madison's soft hair. "They think your father won, that we're just collateral damage in his success story." Madison stirred, her tiny fist curling against Teresa's chest. "But we're going to survive this, baby girl. We're going to do more than survive." Teresa's voice hardened with determination. "One day, people will know the name Madison Walter, and it won't be because of him. It'll be because of you, because of us. Outside, the city that had once celebrated her now ignored her completely. But inside that small room, something stronger than reputation was being forged. A mother's love and a daughter's destiny, written in determination and whispered promises that would take 23 years to fulfill. The first year was survival, nothing more. Teresa took whatever work came, overnight CAD revisions for firms too busy to credit her name, subcontractor markups on commercial projects, community center renovations that paid barely enough to cover rent. She worked on a second-hand laptop at a folding table, while Madison napped in a stroller beside her, learning to sleep through the clicking of keys and the scratch of pencil on tracing paper. No one wanted to hire the woman who stole from Brandon Walter. But anonymous work? Desperate firms would take that. The turning point came 6 months in, when an email arrived from an address she didn't recognize. Ms. Walter, you don't know me, but I sat on Brandon's board during your audit. I voted against the findings. The numbers never added up, and your division's work was impeccable. I've since left Walter Holdings. If you're still practicing, I have clients who need someone with integrity. Robert Chen. Robert became her quiet champion. He was a retired executive with connections throughout the industry and a conscience that wouldn't let him ignore what had been done to her. He sent her small projects, nothing glamorous but honest work with fair pay. He asked questions about her vision, listened to her ideas, and 6 months later, he wrote her a check. Angel investment, he said simply. Build something that matters. Teresa founded TW Studio with that money, a firm focused on what the industry had forgotten: safe, dignified housing for people the market left behind, single mothers, refugees, the elderly in neglected neighborhoods. Projects that wouldn't make magazine covers but would change lives. The work was hard and the margins were thin, but slowly, quietly, her reputation shifted. Not the disgraced wife, but the architect who shows up, the one who delivers on promises, the firm that actually cares. Madison grew up in places most children never saw. As an infant and toddler, she accompanied Teresa everywhere, sleeping in a portable crib in site trailers, learning to crawl between blueprint tubes, taking her first steps on construction-grade plywood. By age 3, she could identify basic tools. By 4, she understood that walls held up ceilings. By 5, she was asking why hallways were certain widths and whether doors could open different ways. Teresa taught her daughter lessons other children didn't learn: how to read the fine print, why lawyers exist, how words on paper could steal a life's work faster than any thief with a weapon. Never trust someone just because they say they love you, Teresa explained one evening when Madison was 6. Trust what they do when no one's watching. Trust what they put in writing. Madison absorbed it all with unsettling focus. While other children played games, she asked about material costs, timelines, why certain designs work better than others. At 7, a visiting contractor laughed when Madison pointed at a community center blueprint. Why does this hallway waste so much space? You could fit a storage closet there. Out of the mouths of babes, he said, shaking his head. The kid's right. We could reclaim 8 feet if we shifted the mechanical room. By 9, Madison impressed a city housing official by proposing a ventilation redesign that would save $30,000 without compromising air quality. Your daughter, the official told Teresa, is going to run circles around everyone someday. Teresa believed it. 9 years after that terrible night in the hospital, Teresa sat in TW Studio's small office. A real office now, with 2 employees and a growing project list. Rain drummed against the windows as she reviewed a contract, a $2 million housing development for families transitioning out of homelessness. The client had specifically requested Teresa's firm, not because of scandal or sympathy, but because of results. It was late, nearly midnight. Madison should have been home in bed, but she'd insisted on coming to the site inspection that afternoon and had fallen asleep during the drive back. Now the 9-year-old slept curled in Teresa's lap, exhausted from watching foundation work, her small hand clutching her mother's sleeve even in sleep. Teresa read every word of the contract, every clause, every protection. Then she signed her name, Teresa Walter, Principal, TW Studio, beneath the client's signature. It was modest compared to Brandon's billion-dollar mergers, but it was hers, built on her terms, with her integrity intact. She looked down at her sleeping daughter and whispered, "This is how you rebuild, Madison. One honest signature at a time. Remember that." Outside, the city lights glittered through the rain. Somewhere in those towers, Brandon was celebrating his latest acquisition. But here, in this small office, something more valuable was being built. A future written in their own words on their own terms, bound by promises they'd keep. At 14, Madison Walter was not like other teenagers. While her classmates obsessed over social media and weekend plans, she spent evenings coding energy efficiency simulations that could model entire city blocks. She'd won 3 national STEM competitions with software she'd designed herself, predictive tools that calculated carbon footprints, utility costs, and structural integrity simultaneously. "This program is extraordinary," one judge told Teresa at an award ceremony. "Has she considered patent applications?" "Already filed," Madison replied before her mother could answer. "Registered under my name, not the firm's." Teresa had taught her well. Every tool Madison created, every algorithm, every line of code was documented and registered to Madison Walter individual. Not TW Studio, not anyone else. At 16, with Teresa's guidance, Madison established a legal shell company, MW Technologies. Teresa was listed as advisor only, never owner. Madison controlled every signature, every decision, every asset. "Why are you doing this?" a family friend asked. "Don't you trust your mother?" Madison's answer was simple and cold. "I trust her completely, but I've learned that trust isn't enough. Ownership is everything." The truth came on a December evening when Madison was searching for printer paper in Teresa's home office. She opened what she thought was a supply drawer and found it locked. Odd. Her mother never locked anything from her. She found the key taped inside an old coffee mug, another thing her mother had taught her. People hide keys in the most obvious places, and opened the drawer. And inside, a thick accordion file containing documents Madison had never seen. A prenuptial agreement with her mother's signature. An audit report stamped with accusations of fraud. Newspaper clippings with headlines like, "Architect wife accused of embezzlement." Hospital records from the night she was born, showing no emergency contact, no family present. And at the bottom, a stack of Teresa's old design proposals. Concepts for sustainable integrated housing, with notes in Brandon's handwriting and dates that preceded the Meridian merger announcement. Madison sat on the floor, reading every page with increasing clarity. This wasn't just abandonment. This was theft, strategy, premeditation. When Teresa came home an hour later, she found her daughter at the kitchen table, documents spread like evidence at a crime scene. "Madison, tell me." Madison's voice was steady, unnervingly calm. "Tell me everything." So Teresa did. She broke down and told the story she'd protected her daughter from for 16 years. The manipulated prenup, the fabricated audit, Brandon's sister and the venture capitalist orchestrating her destruction, the blocked calls while she labored alone, the merger built partially on concepts Teresa had developed and Brandon had claimed as his own. "He didn't just leave us," Teresa whispered, tears streaming. "He erased us, legally, financially, deliberately." Madison was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke, and her voice carried none of the emotion Teresa expected. "Then we don't forgive," Madison said quietly. "We don't forget. We audit his entire life the way he audited yours. Contracts, companies, image. Everything he weaponized against you, we turn against him. Systematically, strategically, completely. Madison, revenge won't—" "This isn't revenge, Mom." Madison's eyes were cold, focused, frighteningly adult. "This is justice. This is taking back what he stole and making sure he can never do it to anyone else." That night, Madison sat alone in her room, laptop glowing in the darkness. On her screen, a video interview of Brandon Walter from earlier that year, speaking at a business summit. "I'm entirely self-made," he told the interviewer, his smile confident and charming. "Everything I built came from vision, discipline, and refusing to let anything stand in my way. No shortcuts, no handouts, Just pure determination. Madison replayed the line 3 times. Then she opened a new folder on her desktop and titled it, Walter Global Holdings, Structural Weaknesses. She began typing. Every public filing, every acquisition, every partnership. She would learn his empire better than he knew it himself. And then when the time was right, she would dismantle it piece by piece. The girl he'd abandoned was about to become the woman he'd never see coming. Madison finished her undergraduate degree at 19 and an elite MBA program at 20, graduating top of her class with dual concentrations in sustainable technology and corporate restructuring. Her thesis, Ethical Disruption Using Predictive Analytics to Reclaim Exploited Markets, won academic awards but was really a blueprint for something far more personal. The evening after graduation, she sat with Teresa in TW Studios' conference room and laid out a proposal. "We merge my tech company with your architecture firm," Madison said, sliding a business plan across the table. "New entity, new vision. We call it Walter Dynamics." Teresa looked up sharply. "You want to use his name?" "It's our name, Mom. He doesn't own it. We reclaim it as our banner, not his trophy." Madison's eyes were steel. "And we use it to take back everything he stole." It took a year to properly structure everything. Legal entities, capital raising, strategic planning, team building. Walter Dynamics officially launched when Madison turned 21, a hybrid firm combining sustainable architecture, predictive analytics, and intelligent urban planning. Their model was surgical: identify underserved markets Brandon had exploited, offer superior solutions at competitive prices, and execute flawlessly. Madison had spent 4 years studying Walter Global Holdings, like a general studies an enemy's weak points. She knew which vendors he'd underpaid, which municipalities he'd abandoned with half-finished projects, which investors had grown tired of his arrogance and broken promises. Walter Dynamics approached them all with a different offer: transparency, partnership, and technology that actually delivered results. The first victory was small, a $10 million housing contract in a mid-tier city Brandon had neglected. Walter Dynamics delivered ahead of schedule and under budget. Word spread. Over the next 6 months, 3 more contracts followed, then 7, then 12. Madison systematically hired engineers Brandon had overworked and underpaid, offering them equity stakes and proper work-life balance. She recruited project managers he'd blamed for his own failures. She courted investors who'd watched their returns stagnate while Brandon chased vanity projects. Every move was calculated. Every offer targeted a specific grievance, a known pressure point. "We've lost the Denver contract," Brandon's CFO reported at a quarterly board meeting, 8 months into Walter Dynamics operations. "Some new firm called Walter Dynamics undercut us by 15% with better tech specs." Brandon barely looked up from his phone. "Let them have the scraps. We're closing the Singapore deal next month. $800 million. Denver is noise." But the noise kept getting louder. By the end of year 1, Walter Dynamics just poached our lead structural engineer and took 6 of his team with him. 18 months in, the Houston municipal contract we've held for 8 years just went to Walter Dynamics. The mayor cited performance concerns with our last 3 projects. By the 2-year mark, the pattern was undeniable. Brandon finally started paying attention. He pulled Walter Dynamics' corporate filings, scanned their leadership profiles. The CEO was listed as M. Walter, age 23, with an elite pedigree but no photo readily available. "It's just coincidence," Veronica assured him. "Walter is a common enough name. Some aggressive startup trying to make noise. You're building a global empire. Don't get distracted by mosquitoes." Brandon wanted to believe her. But something about the company's strategy felt uncomfortably familiar. They seemed to know exactly where Walter Global was vulnerable, as if they had inside intelligence on every weak point. The turning point came 2.5 years into Walter Dynamics' operation. The Chicago Skyline project, a $500 million mixed-use development that would define the city's next decade. Brandon had considered it a guaranteed win. His company had been in preliminary talks for 2 years. Then Walter Dynamics submitted a competing bid with revolutionary sustainable technology, guaranteed cost controls, and a community partnership model that made Brandon's proposal look outdated and extractive by comparison. The city council voted unanimously, Walter Dynamics. Brandon's stock dropped 4% in a single day, the first significant decline in 7 years. His board demanded an emergency meeting. "Who are these people?" his lead investor barked. "And why do they know how to beat us at our own game?" Brandon stared at the contract announcement, at the name printed across the winning firm's letterhead. Walter Dynamics, M. Walter, CEO. For the first time in years, something cold crawled up his spine. A feeling he hadn't experienced since he was young and hungry and fighting to prove himself. The feeling of being hunted. The global economic downturn hit like a tidal wave, and Brandon's empire, over-leveraged and built on aggressive expansion, began to crack. First came the investigative report. A major news outlet exposed safety shortcuts in 3 Walter Global properties. Substandard materials, bypassed inspections, cost-cutting measures that put residents at risk. One building in Miami showed structural deficiencies that could have caused catastrophic failure. The headlines were brutal. Billionaire's empire built on dangerous corners cut. Walter Global faces federal safety probe. Then the lawsuits arrived. Then the regulatory investigations. Then the banks started making calls. "Your debt-to-equity ratio is unsustainable," Brandon's lead banker said during an emergency meeting. "We're calling in $400 million in loans unless you secure a strategic partner within 90 days. Brandon's stock plummeted. Investors fled. His board convened crisis meetings where the same name kept appearing on every analyst's recommendation list, Walter Dynamics. "They're the obvious choice," his CFO argued. "Strong capital position, stellar reputation for ethics and execution. And they operate in complementary markets. It's a natural fit." Brandon stared at the name on the proposal document. "There has to be another option." "There isn't," Veronica said quietly. Her usual confidence had evaporated. "Not unless you want to watch everything collapse. Brandon, we're facing bankruptcy, possibly criminal charges if these investigations find what I think they'll find." Finally, Brandon pulled up Madison's public profile. The image loaded slowly, a professional headshot of a young woman in her early 20s. Dark hair, sharp features, and eyes that made his breath catch. His eyes, Teresa's jawline. The surname Walter positioned like a declaration of war. "It's her," he whispered. "It's Teresa's daughter." The room went silent. "The baby you—" Veronica couldn't finish the sentence. Brandon's hands shook slightly. "How is this possible?" "Because she's brilliant," his CFO said, reading through Madison's credentials. "MIT graduate, multiple patents. She's been systematically outmaneuvering us while you dismissed her as a nuisance." "You have to negotiate," Veronica urged. "Set aside your pride. If you don't, we lose everything." The meeting was arranged in neutral territory, a law firm's conference room downtown. Brandon arrived with Veronica and 2 attorneys. Madison came alone. When she walked in, Brandon felt the floor shift beneath him. She was poised, professional, carrying herself with Teresa's grace, but with something harder underneath. Something he recognized because he'd once possessed it himself. Hunger, purpose, the look of someone who'd spent years preparing for a single moment. "Mr. Walter," Madison said coolly, extending her hand. "Thank you for making time." Her handshake was firm. Her expression revealed nothing. "You're—" Brandon's voice faltered. "You're my—" "I'm the CEO of Walter Dynamics," she interrupted smoothly. "Here to discuss a potential partnership. I suggest we keep this strictly professional, for everyone's benefit." For 2 hours, Madison laid out terms with surgical precision. Walter Dynamics would provide capital infusion and operational restructuring. In exchange, they'd acquire significant equity stakes and board representation. Brandon tried to negotiate. Madison didn't budge. "These are the terms," she said simply. "Your company needs our capital more than we need your properties. Take it or face your creditors alone." Veronica kicked him under the table. His attorneys nodded urgently. "I need time to review," Brandon started. "You have 72 hours, Madison said, standing. "After that, we move on to other opportunities. There are 3 other distressed portfolios we're evaluating. She handed him a preliminary memorandum of understanding. This secures our negotiating position and gives us leverage over your immediate debt. Once signed, we'll proceed to final terms. Brandon stared at the document, at his daughter's signature already inked at the bottom, waiting for his. "Sign it, Brandon," Veronica whispered. "We're out of options." His hand trembled as he picked up the pen. He told himself this was just a preliminary agreement, just buying time. He'd find a way to maintain control. He signed Brandon Walter. Madison collected the document without a word, her expression neutral. But as she walked out, Brandon caught the briefest glimpse of something in her eyes. Something cold and satisfied and utterly final. He just signed away everything to the daughter he'd abandoned, and he didn't even realize it yet. The press conference was staged in Walter Tower's grand ballroom. Chandeliers glittering, cameras positioned for maximum coverage, financial journalists and investors filling every seat. The narrative had been carefully crafted. Visionary partnership saves industry giant. Brandon would emerge heroic, his legend intact. He stood backstage, adjusting his tie, rehearsing his opening remarks. Redemption, collaboration, the future. Then Madison walked past him toward the stage entrance, and Teresa was beside her. Brandon's blood turned to ice. "What is she doing here?" "You'll see," Madison said without stopping. They stepped into the lights together. The room's energy shifted immediately, whispers rippling through the crowd as older journalists recognized Teresa from scandal photos taken 23 years ago. But she wasn't broken now. She stood tall in an elegant suit, co-founder credentials displayed on the screen behind them. Madison approached the podium with absolute confidence. "Thank you all for coming. Today's announcement will reshape this industry's understanding of accountability." Brandon walked onto the stage as planned, but Madison didn't yield the microphone. "Walter Dynamics is not partnering with Walter Global Holdings," she said clearly. "We are acquiring all core assets at distressed valuation. Mr. Brandon Walter will step down from all operational and strategic roles, retaining only a non-voting advisory position with no decision-making authority." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Cameras flashed frantically. Brandon stood frozen. "That's not... We agreed to a partnership." "No, Mr. Walter. You signed a preliminary memorandum giving us leverage over your debt. The final terms, which your board approved this morning, specify full acquisition." Madison's voice was steady, surgical. "You should read contracts more carefully, or perhaps have independent counsel review them first." The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew the history. "There's something else you should know," Madison continued, looking directly at the cameras. "My name is Madison Walter. I am the daughter Brandon Walter, abandoned before birth, the child he dismissed while my mother gave birth alone after he blocked her calls from the hospital." Gasps erupted. Cameras swiveled to capture Brandon's face draining of color. Madison spoke carefully, factually, laying out the prenup manipulation, the fabricated audit, the merger built partially on Teresa's stolen concepts. "This acquisition isn't revenge. It's reclamation. Taking back what was built on our work, our sacrifice, our erasure." She slid documents across the table. "Sign the transfer papers, Mr. Walter, or face your creditors in bankruptcy court." Brandon's hands shook as he signed, cameras capturing every moment of his humiliation. An hour later, Madison stood alone in Brandon's corner office. Her office now. He entered hesitantly, a broken man in an expensive suit. She laid out evidence across the desk. Hospital records, blocked call logs, the prenup. Articles crediting him with Teresa's ideas. "Were we really worth less than this?" Madison asked quietly. "Less than a bigger merger and a cleaner image?" Brandon sank into a chair. "I was terrified of losing power. The board, Diane, Veronica, they made it seem like the only choice. But it was cowardice, not necessity. I chose wealth over family." His voice cracked. "I regret it every single day." "I didn't come here seeking a father," Madison said. "I came to ensure no woman you encounter will ever be powerless on paper again. You'll receive a modest lifetime stipend, enough to live comfortably but quietly. In exchange, you will never use the Walter name in any business capacity. It belongs to us now." She walked to the window. Below, The city stretched endlessly. This was never about destroying you, Madison continued. It was about making sure the world knows that contracts, power, and cruelty have consequences. That abandoned children grow up, and that sometimes they come back. Brandon rode the elevator down in silence, security escorting him through the lobby he'd once owned. Cameras captured his exit. No longer a titan, just another man leaving a building. Upstairs, Teresa and Madison stood together at the window, watching the skyline they would now shape with integrity, innovation, and the name they'd reclaimed. "We did it, baby girl," Teresa whispered. Madison's reflection showed no triumph, only quiet resolution. "No, Mom, we survived it. There's a difference." Below, the city hummed with possibility. And the Walter name finally meant something worth building on. The end. My beautiful family, if Teresa and Madison's story touched your heart, then let me ask you something important. How many women are signing documents right now without reading them? How many are being told just trust me when they should be hiring lawyers? How many pregnant mothers are being abandoned by men who promised forever? This is why we share these stories. This is why your engagement matters. If you believe no billionaire should get away with abandoning his pregnant wife, hit that like button right now. If you believe that contracts can steal everything but they can't kill your spirit, leave a comment saying, "I stand with Teresa," or "Madison is my hero." Your comment could be the message another betrayed woman needs to see today. And my dearest family, please share this video. Share it with a woman signing a prenup without independent counsel. Share it with a single mother who thinks her child's father won. Share it with someone who needs to know that abandoned children grow up, and sometimes they come back as CEOs. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. May the Almighty continue to protect every woman reading this, every child being raised with dignity instead of wealth, and every mother teaching her daughter that ownership is everything and trust must be earned on paper. Until next time, my beautiful family, stay strong, stay blessed, and remember, never sign anything you haven't read 3 times. Your signature is sacred. Your future is worth protecting. This is our family. This is our mission. God bless you,